We're excited to share with you the request for proposals for our state action networks. My name is Rebecca Villarreal, and I'm a Senior Director in Jobs for the Future's Center for Justice and Economic Advancement. JFF is a national nonprofit committed to driving transformation of U.S. education and workforce systems to drive economic success for people, businesses, and communities. Our vision and North Star is that by 2033, 75 million Americans facing barriers to economic advancement will have quality jobs. JFF's Center for Justice and Economic Advancement brings that North Star to life for people with histories of arrest, conviction, or incarceration. Within our center, we partner with employers, education and training providers, corrections agencies, and others to promote education, training, and fair chance employment for people in corrections facilities and communities. In the first 3 years of our center, we built 3 discrete impact areas. As we designed Fair Chance to Advance, we were eager to bring all 3 of CJ's impact areas to bear in a particular state and leverage the breadth of JFF's expertise in service of one of our North Star populations. We are incredibly thankful to Molly Lasagna and Ascendium Education Group for their support of our vision. We've benefited for over a year to design Fair Chance to Advance and engage with key stakeholders, several of whom I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge and thank for their contributions. We had a phenomenal advisory board, members who generously shared their expert advice and insights. We visited with innovative leaders that are already bringing some components of Fair Chance to Advance to life in their state through site visits and convenings. And lastly, our project team, both at Coleridge and Jobs for the Future. Building this complex, field-informed initiative has been a test of creativity and endurance. We are looking forward to collaborating with each of you to build and strengthen fair chance ecosystems in states across the country. This info session will provide an introduction to Fair Chance to Advance and the recently released RFP for state action networks, an overview of the mandatory stakeholders for state-based proposals, a detailed timeline for the open RFP period, a detailed overview of the funding and technical assistance that selected grantee states will receive, guidelines for completing a collaborative proposal on behalf of a state, a preview of our timeline for grantee state selection and the launch of state action networks in each of the 4 states. I'm pleased to turn it over to Jenna Dreyer, our Fair Chance to Advance Project Director.
Thank you so much, Rebecca, and thanks to all who are tuning in for this info session. As Rebecca previewed, I'm going to turn now to providing an introduction to JFF's Fair Chance to Advance initiative, which benefited from a year-long planning and design phase thanks to the generous support of Ascendium Education Group. Nearly 1 in 3 Americans have a record of arrest, conviction, or incarceration, making the U.S. the global leader in incarceration and punishment. And the harms we know do not end after incarceration, as having a record of any kind raises a series of collateral consequences that hamper reentry and limit upward economic mobility. The impacts of this economic exclusion fall disproportionately on Black Americans and create economic effects that are generational. This persistent economic exclusion not only undermines successful reentry and public safety efforts, fueling cycles of poverty and recidivism, but also places a long-term drag on state economies by limiting workforce participation and reducing tax revenues. Fortunately, the landscape of economic opportunity available to people with histories of incarceration is in a place for change. And as a number of powerful shifts are taking place across the country, we're excited to see this momentum unfold. Federal Pell Grants have been restored for learners who are currently incarcerated, and that sparked a moment of pretty incredible evolution for talent development opportunities that are available in corrections settings after being signed into law by President Trump in 2020 and taking effect in July of 2023. We're seeing more and more cross-sector collaborations that are accelerating in response to Pell reinstatement. We're seeing states taking the lead on improving reentry outcomes, and we're seeing bipartisan commitment to that goal through recent executive orders from governors across the political spectrum and in states that are participating in initiatives like Reentry 2030, which include Missouri, Alabama, North Carolina, Nebraska, New York, and Washington. And we're also seeing more employers and industries that are turning to fair chance hiring practice in response to recent workforce shortages and to the compelling business case and the really compelling human case for hiring the best person for the job, regardless of their background. But despite this momentum, there are still systemic barriers that persist, and our current education, workforce, corrections, and reentry systems in most states typically operate separately with little communication or collaboration, which limits the ability of public state systems to expand and scale access to quality education and employment opportunities for people with histories of incarceration. The lack of systems alignment and coordination ultimately leads to lost time and resources for learners, disconnected pathways, learners that find themselves at dead ends, learners who are completing programs that don't ultimately translate into meaningful credentials or employment opportunities, fair chance employers that aren't directly connected to the talent development pathways in their state, poorly coordinated reentry services that fail to bridge the transition from incarceration to community reintegration, duplicated efforts, inconsistent access to services and support depending on where someone is incarcerated or released, and missed opportunities to really see the full possible impact of education and workforce investments in corrections settings. And additionally, while there are programs and institutions that have made tremendously important strides and built tremendously impactful programs, in the absence of system-wide coordination and the appropriate level of financial resources, they still fail or fall short of meeting the scale of need and the scale of demand for these pathways, leaving those who are not able to access them behind. The lack of ability to scale means that there's inconsistent access to opportunity depending on where someone is incarcerated or released. There are inequities in program quality, delivery, and outcomes, and we see an over-reliance on small pilots or short-term initiatives that are not sustained or expanded across the state. Fair Chance to Advance was really designed as a response to this specific set of challenges. Through the initiative, JFF aims to support states in overcoming these challenges by taking a more coordinated statewide approach to improving economic mobility for people with histories of incarceration. At the heart of Fair Chance to Advance is the focus on dismantling barriers and creating broader pathways to economic advancement for people with histories of incarceration by improving that alignment at the state level. As a result of the year-long design phase, during which we engaged with hundreds of partners from across the country and from across the Learn to Work ecosystem, we identified 8 core stakeholder groups whose work is critical to this shared goal. Those folks include state leaders and policymakers, departments of corrections and community supervision, post-secondary education and training providers and their state system offices, workforce development agencies and boards, employers, industry organizations and unions, community and advocacy organizations, and reentry, legal, and social benefit service providers. These are the stakeholders who contribute to shaping the fair chance ecosystem in any given state, or the Learn to Work ecosystem of education and employment opportunities that people with histories of incarceration have a fair chance to pursue. While the focus of this information session will be on the recently released RFP for Fair Chance to Advance State Action Networks, I want to take just a moment to locate this opportunity within the broader Fair Chance to Advance initiative. Fair Chance to Advance is comprised of 4 interconnected activities. Through Activity 1, our state action networks, which we'll speak more about throughout the session, we focus on accelerating momentum on a state-by-state basis by cultivating, convening, and resourcing state action networks to develop and implement blueprints for systemic transformation and outcomes tracking in leading-edge states that already have the necessary foundations in place for systems change. As part of this umbrella of work, we also work with states that are preparing to launch state action networks to first establish those necessary conditions for systems change by helping them align cross-sector leadership, clarify shared goals, and build infrastructure for collaborating. The second activity that makes up Fair Chance to Advance is our national network, which will be open to representatives from any state who are committed to developing fair chance ecosystems. The national network will really be our space to elevate learning and best practices for developing collaborative state ecosystems, to increase peer-to-peer support and knowledge sharing, and to foster strategic connections. Through Activity 3, we'll then continue to do work specifically in support of specific stakeholder groups. So, for example, we'll continue to facilitate open door communities of practice like our Normalizing Education Collective, that focuses on a specific stakeholder group and provides community support, learning, communications, and technical assistance that's specific to their role within state ecosystems. And then finally, through Activity 4, we'll continue to facilitate application-driven professional development activities like our Fair Chance to Advance Fellowship program that are designed to foster growth for emerging leaders from specific stakeholder groups and to provide the professional development opportunities specific to their role within their collaborative state ecosystem. Thanks to a recent investment from Ascendium Education Group, we have just released the open RFP, inviting states to apply to be part of the inaugural cohort of Fair Chance to Advance State Action Network. So that's where we'll spend the bulk of our time today. Through these state action networks, JFF ultimately aims to demonstrate the change that's possible when state systems are aligned around the shared goal of improving economic outcomes for people with histories of incarceration by resourcing those leading edge states to accelerate work that's already underway and then to rigorously track outcomes that show the impact of coordinated cross-system efforts on behalf of this population. The states selected to launch Fair Chance to Advance action networks will receive support, including grant funding and technical assistance over a period of 4 years. That's intended to help them design and implement coordinated policies and practices that will create clear pathways to quality jobs for people who are or have been incarcerated. Through the open RFP, JFF will select a cohort of 4 grantee states that have demonstrated the necessary conditions for systemic change and will provide subgrants and technical assistance to support their cultivation and coordination of a Fair Chance to Advance State Action Network. And so there will be 1 network in each state that will operate over the period of performance of 4 years. JFF is partnering with the Coleridge Initiative to provide targeted technical assistance to these states, which I'll describe in fuller detail later in the session. And that has been designed to help participating states build lasting infrastructure for collaboration and data-informed decision-making, and we're excited about that partnership. Ultimately, by participating in the initiative, selected states will have the opportunity to transform our typically siloed systems into a more coordinated, data-driven ecosystem that expands access to education, employment, and economic mobility for people with histories of incarceration. By the end of the 4-year period of performance, we expect all of our state action networks to achieve 3 primary goals. Participating states will demonstrate greater systems alignment that includes strengthened relationships, increased communication and flow of information across stakeholder groups, increased collaboration across stakeholder groups, increased ability to connect learners to opportunities across the state, and key policy and practice changes that better support coordinated cross-system efforts going forward. Second, through our partnership with the Coleridge Initiative, participating states will also emerge with the ability and technical know-how to leverage integrated state education, workforce, and corrections data systems, and to utilize their integrated data dashboards to increase data-informed decision-making aligned to the goals of the network. And finally, by the end of the 4-year period, state action networks will be prepared to sustain their efforts to improve data systems, policy, and practice changes among agencies and employers, and to continue robust collaboration amongst the key stakeholder groups beyond the end of the grant period. In addition to those core 3 goals that we have for all state networks, each state will then also work towards a series of state-specific outcomes based on the context of their state's fair chance ecosystem. These outcomes vary based on state context, the current strengths and limitations of the state's fair chance ecosystem, and the levers that that network is able to identify as having the greatest potential to positively impact economic outcomes for people with histories of incarceration. But this slide includes several examples of what such state-specific outcomes might look like, and there are a few additional examples included in the RFP. Fair Chance to Advance is really grounded in the belief that transformational change happens when public systems are aligned, community voices are centered, and data is being used strategically. And we are tremendously excited to have leveraged the design phase to build out our partnership with the Coleridge Initiative, which is a nonprofit organization working with governments to ensure that data are more effectively used for public decision-making. Their work in the field of corrections focuses specifically on building the data systems that are necessary to answer key questions about the educational experiences of students while incarcerated and the educational and workforce outcomes of those students post-incarceration. Selected grantee states will work with JFF and Coleridge excuse me, on integrating data from 3 state agencies, post-secondary education, corrections, and workforce, to support the goals of the Fair Chance to Advance State Action Networks. We're thrilled that Ascendium's investment allows us to make this data integration, dashboard development, and training available to the selected grantee states at no cost to the states. For full details about the data integration milestones and the corresponding technical assistance that Coleridge will provide over the 4-year period of performance, we strongly encourage prospective grantees and their state data officers to see the separate recorded information session on Fair Chance to Advance data integration hosted by JFF and Coleridge. That's linked in the RFP. The session offers a deeper dive into how Fair Chance to Advance state action networks will be supported in developing secure, integrated state data systems to support their cross-agency collaboration, track progress, and inform policy and program decisions going forward. Our support for the selected state action networks will ultimately include 2 phases of funding and technical assistance that, taken together, make up that 4-year period of performance. In phase 1, selected states will begin with a phase 1 planning grant of up to $300,000 that must be spent down within a period of 24 months. These funds are meant to support planning, network infrastructure, and coordination efforts as the network comes together. We've established phase 1 as an up to 24 months, given that some states are positioned to move more quickly through the planning deliverables that are required for that phase, while others might take a bit more time. Unlocking a phase 2 grant is ultimately contingent upon first successfully completing the phase 1 planning deliverables and milestones. Phase 2 will then span the balance of that 4-year period of performance. So if a state needs all 24 months to complete the planning deliverables for phase 1, they'll then spend the balance of 24 months to complete the implementation phase, making up that full 4 years. For states that might move more quickly through phase 1, they will likewise then progress more quickly to phase 2 and unlock the phase 2 implementation grant of $1.8 million as soon as they have met the phase 1 planning deliverables and data integration milestones. The phase 2 funds are meant to support the implementation of the coordinated strategies and reforms that were developed during the planning period, and states will have the remainder of that 4-year period of performance to spend down those funds in alignment with their state-specific goals and priorities. In addition to these 2 phases of direct funding to states, selected states will also receive free technical assistance services from JFF and Coleridge that we valued at approximately $1.8 million total per state across the 2 phases. And these services will be detailed later in the session, but at a high level, they include state-specific needs assessment and asset mapping, network coordination, targeted technical assistance based on state needs, and the development of the integrated state agency data dashboards. Our aim is to select a cohort of 4 states that represent a diverse range of geographies, political contexts, and correctional landscapes. Ideally, the cohort will include 1 state from each major region of the country, as defined by the U.S. Census Bureau and reflected on this slide. Each of these states needs to have successfully demonstrated the necessary readiness and enabling conditions for systems change and be poised to serve as an example for the neighboring states in their region. While we anticipate receiving proposals from at least 1 state in each region that successfully demonstrates that readiness, if that does not occur for any reason, we'll reevaluate our cohort design and prioritize states that have demonstrated readiness while still striving to maintain the greatest possible diversity in terms of geography, political context, and correctional landscape. To respond to the RFP, JFF is asking for collaborative proposals on behalf of a state and asking for evidence that that state has demonstrated a commitment to systems change. Proposals must be developed and submitted on behalf of a specific state and demonstrate the engagement of a cross-sector coalition of stakeholders from that state. Recognizing that state ecosystems differ significantly, the RFP is designed to provide as much flexibility as possible in terms of the composition of state action network partners that are contributing to a state's application and the allocation of phase 1 funding that will go to supporting the participation of those partners. While stakeholder composition will vary by state, there are 5 mandatory stakeholder groups, and there are a series of general requirements for each of those groups that states are required to meet in order to be considered eligible for funding. Proposals that also include the additional recommended inclusions will then receive priority consideration. Because Fair Chance to Advance is designed to mobilize public state systems and align those systems in support of people with histories of incarceration, the first three mandatory stakeholder groups represent the three public state systems most essential to that effort. The first of these public systems is state departments of correction and community supervision. To be eligible, proposals must include a commitment from a state level entity for both corrections and community supervision to participate in the network. In some states, this is one agency that oversees both. In other states, there are separate agencies overseeing these two functions. But given the emphasis on data and data integration, proposals must also include a letter of commitment from the official responsible for governance and use of correctional data systems. A template for this letter of commitment is included as one of the appendices to the RFP. While the baseline requirement, therefore, is to include commitments from the system office, and from the appropriate data officer, we actively encourage states to also include additional stakeholders from this group, and for instance, to consider including staff from the facility or local leadership levels as well as the state level. The second mandatory stakeholder group that falls under the umbrella of public systems is post-secondary education and workforce training providers and their system offices. The makeup of this stakeholder group looks really different in every state, one of the key things we learned during the design phase. But the requirement at a base level is that a state level entity must participate in the network. So this might be the leader of a state consortium representing post-secondary education and prison programs. It might be a representative from the state's higher ed system office that deals with post-secondary education and prison, if such an office exists in that state, or perhaps a combination of both. Other examples of state offices that might be relevant here include state apprenticeship offices or state adult education offices. Because the state's post-secondary education data will likewise be critical to the data integration work, once again, proposals must include a letter of commitment from the official responsible for governance and use of post-secondary education data systems. In some states, there may be a data officer that oversees more than one of these different data sets. For example, in Arkansas, there's a data officer who oversees data from 3 different state agencies. But in other states, there will be a different officer that oversees data for each system. Ultimately, the requirement is for the necessary officer in the context of that state to provide the letter of commitment. So again, here the baseline commitment is to include the involvement of the system level entity and the letter of commitment from the appropriate data officer. But here again, we actively encourage states to also include additional stakeholders from this group, and particularly to consider representation from individual post-secondary education or workforce training providers that are operating in corrections facilities in the state. The third mandatory stakeholder group under the public state systems umbrella is workforce development agencies and boards. Like post-secondary, the makeup of the stakeholder group looks different in every state, but the requirement is that a state level entity participate in the network. This might be a representative from a state Department of Labor or a state Department of Economic Development or Commerce, or a statewide coalition of workforce development boards, a state level entity overseeing workforce opportunities in the state. Because the state's workforce data is again critical to the data integration work, proposals must include the letter of commitment, the third and final letter of commitment from a data officer from the officer responsible for governance and use of workforce data systems in the state. The baseline requirements here again are to include that commitment from a system level entity and the letter from the appropriate data officer, but we actively encourage states to also include stakeholders that might represent local or regional workforce boards or other partners that are relevant in their specific context. The fourth mandatory stakeholder group is state leaders and policymakers. This group might include representatives from the governor's office or state legislators or their legislative staff, attorneys general, or other relevant state leadership. Proposals must, at minimum, include a letter of support or commitment from the governor's office and or from state legislators that affirm a commitment to addressing policy barriers and creating enabling conditions for fair chance education and employment for people with histories of incarceration. Beyond that baseline requirement of a letter of commitment, we highly recommend that these folks directly participate, and ideally representatives from the governor's office or state legislators or legislative staff are actively participating in the network, if that's a possibility in the selected state. The fifth and final mandatory stakeholder group is system impacted leaders. Fair Chance to Advance is ultimately designed and reflects JFF's commitment to centering leaders with lived experience in all of our work. In addition to our recommendation that states include staff with lived experience of incarceration as representatives from the different participating agencies or organizations that make up the larger network, recognizing the importance of that being a voluntary disclosure. There's also then a built-in requirement for states to engage a directly impacted advisory board. Directly impacted advisory boards will be made up of 5 individuals with lived experience of incarceration in that state, and they'll provide critical insights and guidance to the State Action Network to ensure that the project remains grounded in the real-world experiences and needs of those it aims to serve. The boards will meet regularly to review progress, provide feedback, and suggest adjustments to the project's activities and strategies, and grantees will be required to document this feedback and provide a rationale for which feedback was incorporated. At this stage, proposals simply need to confirm their acceptance of this requirement. Pre-identification of directly impacted advisory board members is not a requirement. Instead, following the announcement of selected grantee states, JFF will circulate a call for applications for prospective advisory board members, leveraging our national network of directly impacted professionals, and will then partner with the steering committees for each state action network on the selection and formation of their boards. JFF will also provide all board members with fair compensation for their time and contributions, and will provide professional development opportunities that strengthen their leadership and engagement in systems change efforts. Beyond those 5 mandatory stakeholder groups, there are 3 additional stakeholder groups that make up a state's fair chance ecosystem and make up a state action network. Following grantee selection, JFF will support the selected states in building out a comprehensive state action network that includes representatives from these 3 additional groups. So while commitments from these additional groups are not required for eligibility, proposals that proactively are able to include commitments from these groups or plans for engaging these stakeholders in the network will be prioritized during the review phase. And just to spend one more moment on that, let me quickly voice over what those groups include. Again, employers, industry organizations, and unions, community-based and advocacy organizations, including the examples listed on the slide, and reentry legal and social benefit service providers. And I'll turn it over here to my colleague, Michael Fisher, who will walk us through the timeline for the RFP. Michael, over to you.
Thanks, Jenna. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Michael Fisher. I'm a senior manager at JFF Center for Justice and Economic Advancement. I'm also on the project management team for the Fair Chance to Advance initiative. I want to talk to you a little bit about the RFP timeline so that you're kind of making sure to have these on your radar as we're kind of coming ahead to the different dates. So the first one, of course, is if you're already watching this, then the RFP is open and the recording session is out. And so the next thing that will come after that period is what we're calling an open question period between August 5th and August 19th. This is really a chance for you to reach out to us with any questions that you have as you're looking through those materials. We have a dedicated email inbox set up for this, which is fairchancetoadvance@jff.org. And so we'll be receiving those questions through that email inbox, and we'll be aiming to respond within 48 hours. The next thing that will happen will be a live office hours with representatives from the Fair Chance to Advance team and the Coleridge Initiative, which Jenna talked about before, the folks that are kind of doing the data side of the initiative. That is the first one of those. There'll be 3. The first one is on August 19th, starting at 2:30 Eastern time. Following all of that, we will take that opportunity to update the set of FAQs that we have already published. We'll think about the questions that have come in, the questions that have come in to the inbox, to the office hours, and update that FAQ with what we've kind of gathered thus far, so that hopefully we can be answering questions for folks proactively before they have to reach out to us. Then we'll have the letter of intent due on August 26th. I'll talk a little bit more about digging into the details of the different submission pieces. So I won't say a whole lot more about it here, but just to say that August 26th is the date for the letter of intent. And then, as I mentioned, the 2 final office hour sessions, one in September, on September 11th, and then one on October 6th. We tried to space these out to give folks enough time to, as you're kind of moving through, to be coming to, if you come across questions at different points, we don't want you to have realized you've got some burning question, but all of the office hours have already come and gone. So we kind of space these in a way to hope that folks can get their questions answered kind of in a timely cadence as you're moving through these materials. The proposal deadline for the full proposal is October 14th. And then we'll be doing finalist interviews in the first 2 weeks of November, notifying selected grantees in the later half of November. and then executing those contracts right at the end of the year, December, January. And then February begins the implementation period. So that will run February to February from 2026 to 2030. So that's kind of the top to bottom rundown from today until all the way through 2030 of what the RFP timeline will look like.
Thanks so much,
and I will
Michael.
send it back to Jenna to talk a little bit about, what exactly we are offering at each phase.
Yes, indeed. So of course, as you'll expect, this is outlined in full in the RFP, but we'll take this opportunity to just offer a little bit of additional voiceover on a couple of component pieces. So as I've already laid out, the initiative is organized into 2 phases of opportunity for selected states. The phase 1 awards are focused on network formation, analysis, and coordinated action planning, and that award funding is up to $300,000. And then the technical assistance from JFF and Coleridge at this phase is valued at approximately $880,000 per state as in-kind technical assistance. Once again, the timeline to spend down is 24 months. Some states will move more quickly through these planning deliverables. Some states will need more time. The planning deliverables themselves include the following. So we ask that all state grantees complete a network charter that will include their mission, vision, and purpose statements, as well as their ways of working and rules of engagement. States will also develop a state-specific logic model for building and strengthening a fair chance ecosystem at the state level. They'll develop a state-specific plan for evaluating impact and collecting data, as well as state-specific blueprints for coordinated action. These will really be the blueprints for the implementation phase, phase 2, and they'll incorporate action plans that are developed by a series of subcommittees that I'll speak more about in just a moment. States will also leverage phase 1 to build their budgets for phase 2, articulating how their state action network will leverage the subgrant in alignment with the state-specific priorities and needs that it's identified. And they'll be asked to include a summary of feedback provided by their directly impacted advisory board. We'll also be supporting states over the course of the 4-year period of performance in pursuing additional fundraising. And so at the closeout of phase 1, we'll be asking states to summarize their fundraising efforts to date, as well as their plans for continuing to cultivate additional local funders during phase 2 with support from JFF. And finally, we'll ask for a summary reflection on the network's phase 1 work and momentum. These are the key deliverables that are necessary then to unlock work in phase 2. In addition to the planning deliverables, we also then have 2 key data integration milestones that are required to progress to phase 2 and to unlock the phase 2 investment. As I prefaced earlier in the session, we go into much greater depth on these data integration milestones in the separate recorded information session with the Coleridge Initiative, so please do check that out. But just to establish understanding at a high level, there are 2 key requirements for a state to move to phase 2. The first is that they'll need to establish data sharing agreements between each of the 3 state agencies, corrections, post-secondary, and workforce, and between each of those agencies and the Coleridge Initiative. We'll then also be working with states to ensure that they've achieved the first ingestion of their state agency data into Coleridge's secure administrative data research facility, ideally at least 6 months prior to the start of phase 2. And the goal there is that in that case, we're able to ensure that funding and data integration work continues uninterrupted straight into phase 2. So that's the goal that we are setting for states at the outset. But again, for additional information and really a much deeper dive into these deliverables and the technical assistance that will be offered to help states meet these milestones, please see the separate recorded information session with Coleridge. Ultimately, throughout the work of phase 1, JFF's role will be to help support states in building out the infrastructure of their state action network. And this visual is a quick glimpse of the different component groups that make up that broader state action network. At the phase of application, we are looking for the folks that have committed to being part of the steering committee for a state action network. This will be the core group of representatives from each of the Fair Chance to Advance stakeholder groups. Again, 5 of those groups are mandatory at the time of the application phase. The other 3 are optional, and we will work with states to engage stakeholders from those groups after grantee selection based on the specifics of their state context. But ultimately, this group will be the one that provides the strategic leadership and be responsible for guiding the development of each of the phase 1 deliverables. I've already spoken about the directly impacted advisory boards. That will be a requirement for each state. This will be the group of 5 individuals that weighs in and provides feedback on the key phase 1 deliverables that benefits from their expertise. Beyond that, we then also have plans to establish committees around data. This will be the group of folks that works directly with the Coleridge Initiative to move towards the data integration milestones. Around policy, this will be a subcommittee that brings together a coalition of stakeholders that are focused on state policy landscape and co-developing a policy and appropriations plan. A post-secondary committee that will be focused on aligning the prison education programs that are offered in that state with high demand career pathways, and ultimately develop strategies for strengthening those pathways and expanding the scale of those pathways. And then a workforce development subcommittee that will be charged with identifying state-specific barriers, both to cross-system alignment and to the larger state fair chance ecosystem, and what stands in the way of expanding access to quality employment for system-impacted individuals in that state. So this is sort of a snapshot of what a fully functioning state action network will come to look like with the support of JFF and Coleridge during phase 1 planning and network formation phase. Ultimately, this will look a little bit different in each state, and so we are eager to be co-creating these networks with states after state grantees have been selected, but want to give you a preview of what we imagine that might look like. I'll also just briefly name that, of course, in some states, there are already committees that resemble what we've outlined here that may already be in existence. So for instance, if you have a consortium for post-secondary education in prison that is already meeting regularly, you may not have a need for a post-secondary pathway subcommittee because you have a group in place already that is specifically focused on the alignment of those pathways and the scaling of those pathways. To offer one example, and that could apply here to the other subcommittees as well. Digging into the work we'll do then directly with states outside of cultivating and convening the network itself, I'll just say a few words on the other required activities for states to participate in. And this is really intended to give states a sense of the commitment at the time of application. One, of course, of the key pieces of this is that we will ask all states to participate in our needs assessment processes. This will be a series of surveys and interviews that are conducted as part of our statewide asset mapping and needs assessment phase. We'll also then be asking states to provide data to evaluate state level outcomes that are tied to their individual state objectives and the readiness criteria that they identify in their proposals, either directly or through access to their data dashboard that will be developed in partnership with the Coleridge Initiative. States will be required to provide data to evaluate the cohort's progress towards our shared fair chance to advance objectives, including data submission and use of the dashboards developed in partnership with Coleridge. So those will be shared with both JFF and with a third-party external evaluator of the initiative. And then the final 2 required activities for states is to participate in a couple of grantee convenings. We aim to host a kickoff convening in March of 2026. That'll be a 2 to 3 day event in a to-be-determined city with a major airport. And then similarly, in the following November, we aim to host convening of all state grantees in November of 2026, and then an additional convening in November of 2027. And we ask that states' phase 1 budgets reflect the funding necessary for participants to be able to travel to these convenings. And then finally, states should also be budgeting for hosting an annual state summit. These will be something that we will design in partnerships with state, but at a high level, we want these to be half-day events that are intended to gather members of the full state action network together in person alongside their directly impacted advisory boards for intentional community building and updates on the initiative on an annual basis. Beyond these required activities, participating in the network, participating in needs assessment and evaluation activities, and with JFF hosted convenings and a hosted state summit, there are a few other allowable activities states are allowed to spend phase 1 funds on. Ultimately, our intention is for phase 1 funding to cover staff time and travel to participate in the development of the planning deliverables and the data integration milestones. However, if a state finds that they have the flexibility to spend additional funds elsewhere on items that are directly aligned to the goals of the network, these are all additional examples of allowable activities that can be included in phase 1 budgets. Following phase one, then, and assuming that a state is able to successfully complete each of the phase one planning deliverables and data integration milestones, states will then progress directly into phase two. And our goal is for there to not be a gap in funding between phase one and phase two. We'll work with states on that throughout the course of the planning deliverables to try to ensure that they move directly into phase two funding. At this stage, the award amount goes up to $1.8 million per state, and the technical assistance from JFF and Coleridge is estimated at $920,000 for in-kind technical assistance. The timeline to spend this down, again, reflects the balance of that 4-year period of performance. So depending on how quickly a state moved through phase one, they may have an additional 24 months to spend this down. They may have an additional 36 months to spend this down based on the pace at which they move through phase one. During phase two, states will participate in a selection of phase two technical assistance tracks. These next two slides demonstrate the areas of expertise that JFF and Coleridge bring that will be available to states, but ultimately during phase one and during the needs assessment phase of phase one in particular, we will work with states to identify where their areas of greatest need are and then leverage that to slot them into the phase two technical assistance tracks that make the most sense for their state context. These tracks include data and impact. The offerings in this workstream will be designed to support stakeholders in establishing metrics, collecting data, and ultimately measuring the impact of their systems change and individual outcomes in their state as they work to create a fair chance ecosystem. The second track is state policy. This elective phase two offering will invite JFF to work with the state to execute an in-state convening that provides state leaders and policymakers with an opportunity to make the case for the consensus policy recommendations that were derived from the phase one planning process. Post-secondary pathways, phase two tracks includes a variety of different TA offerings, but at a high level, this will be designed to support ecosystem stakeholders in creating a more robust system of talent development opportunities and pathways that lead to quality jobs in their state. And then our fair chance employer cultivation work, I'll speak more about in just a moment, and I'll speak about how this work continues across phase one and phase two. But during phase two, we'll also provide an opportunity for states that are interested in deeper training in how to cultivate additional fair chance employers in their state, and how we can help more of those employers be prepared to hire the best person for the role, regardless of their background. The second set of phase two tracks that, again, states will be slotted into based on the needs identified during phase one are work-based learning. This is a series of offerings that will be really led by the experts from our Center for Apprenticeship and Work-Based Learning and will support states' development of strong internal pre-apprenticeship, apprenticeship, and other work-based learning efforts to connect opportunities for individuals who are currently in correctional facilities to those work-based learning opportunities. Reentry partnerships will be an opportunity for state networks who select this offering to really focus on building a stronger statewide ecosystem of reentry partners through close coordination of stakeholders in their state, including policymakers, employers, post-secondary correction, reentry, and workforce professionals, and to really build that out as its own collaborative network. And then finally, our young adult talent development track will provide a series of offerings that are designed to support ecosystem stakeholders in creating a more robust system of talent development pathways for young people who are incarcerated in that state, in facilities designated for youth, and also for reengaging young adults in the ecosystem after release. Running across both phase one and phase two, there are two additional value propositions and opportunities for selected state grantees that I want to spend just a moment on. The first is our fair chance employer cultivation work. As Rebecca named in her opening at the top of the session, one of the things that we were most energized by in Design for Fair Chance to Advance was thinking about how we can leverage the 3 different impact areas of our center in support of specific states. One of those key impact areas is the work that we do directly to cultivate fair chance employers and to prepare a broader and more robust pipeline of committed employers who are prepared to support the development of people who are directly impacted and create inclusive environments and opportunities for them to not only get the job, but to stay and to advance. Through Fair Chance to Advance, we will be offering fair chance employer cultivation across both phase one and phase two in the selected states. Ultimately, in terms of what this means for states who are participating, we will be asking State Action Network members to participate in a 90-minute virtual case-making workshop that will equip them with tools and messaging to engage employer partners. But then beyond that, JFF will also be identifying existing fair chance employer champions in the state and engaging them in the promotion of fair chance practices and in network activities as appropriate to that state's context. We'll also conduct a series of 5 Fair Chance 101 workshops in each state that will introduce the business case for hiring people with histories of incarceration to a broader network of employers in the state, and will enroll interested employers in a deeper dive, state-specific fair chance corporate cohort training that will be focused on change management, recruitment strategies, and partnership development. So we're really excited about being able to bring this offering to states and having this opportunity to be building out the bench of employers that are prepared to receive folks that have access to these high-quality training pathways. Similarly, one other offering that runs across both Phase 1 and Phase 2 is the Fair Chance to Advance National Network. I briefly spoke to this when outlining the 4 different activities of Fair Chance to Advance, but want to explicitly name that our work with state action networks will serve as the foundation of this broader national network that is open to individuals committed to fair chances for people with histories of incarceration, and will leverage the creation of that national network to foster more cross-state and regional collaboration, as well as to continue to foster learning and capacity building of specific stakeholder groups. We will require that select representatives from our Fair Chance to Advance grantee state action networks participate in the national network in a couple of ways. The first is that we'll ask them to participate in annual in-person convenings of the national network. These will be strategically held adjacent to the existing annual gatherings we have planned for our state grantees, assuring alignment with other required activities and minimizing any additional travel demands for our state grantees. And then beyond the in-person engagements once a year, we'll also invite select members of state action networks to participate in virtual convenings of that national network. We aim to hold these on a quarterly basis and to leverage them to really elevate insights and best practices, including those emerging from our grantee state action networks, which is why their participation will be so important to that network. And then finally, as part of the broader Fair Chance to Advance initiative, representatives from the grantee states will also have access to some additional technical assistance opportunities that are available to the full national network. These include webinars and presentations, workshops, consultancies, and access to new digital tools and resources. All right, and with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Michael to share a little bit about the guidelines for the application itself for states interested in applying for Fair Chance to Advance state action networks. Michael, back to you.
Great, thanks, Jenna. All right, application guidelines. So this is going to start off with the letter of intent. I touched on this a little bit earlier. Not a whole lot to say here, except to say that this is really in large part for our benefit. That the letter of intent is to allow JFF and the CJ team and the Fair Chance to Advance team to make sure that we have a robust enough team of reviewers to make sure that applications are getting the attention that they deserve. So we in order to do that, we really need to have a good sense of how many states are planning to apply. And so the letter of intent is really just to let us know, hey, my state is planning to apply for this. It really amounts to checking a box. It's a very light lift. It is not binding. No one is going to hold you to this, but it helps us a lot in making sure that we are allocating the right amount of bandwidth commensurate to the number of applications that we're going to get to make sure that your application is really getting as much attention as we want to make sure everyone's getting throughout this process. So that's kind of just one preliminary thing. Then in terms of the full proposal, which we talked about being due October 14th, this breaks down into a number of different pieces. Some of which have different levels of attachments. There's templates for a lot of this, so you won't have to build a lot of this from scratch. But the first thing is a proposal narrative. And this is really, these first 2 pieces are kind of more narrative because they help frame a lot of the evidence that you'll be submitting in later parts of the proposal. And so the proposal narrative is really a chance to kind of introduce us to, here's the stakeholders in our state, here's who we're thinking is going to be involved, and then kind of doing some visioning for what this initiative could look like in your state. What do you imagine Fair Chance to Advance being able to allow you to accomplish through the life cycle of the initiative, and really kind of paint that picture for us so that we can understand how this initiative can move the needle for you in your particular state context. The self-assessment of readiness, this is one that there is a template for this. It runs on a rubric, a fairly simple 1 through 5 rubric, and we're really asking you here to give us just an honest, frank assessment of where you feel like your state stands across the various domains that we're interested in. Again, something frank and as objective as you can be is really helpful to us. The point of this is not to say we're doing great across all domains. If that was the case, you wouldn't need the initiative, right? So we really appreciate a frank assessment here to give us a sense of where you think you need help, where we can kind of do our best work in supporting the place that you want to get to in your state, and helps us kind of ground where you're already at as we're starting to look toward the evidence that you submitted. So then the evidence of readiness, there's going to be many attachments on this front, because this kind of breaks down across different stakeholder groups, some of the stakeholder groups that Jenna was mentioning earlier. There are criteria for eligibility, which is kind of our baseline eligibility criteria. And then in certain domains, there are priority consideration criteria, which I'll talk a little about later. But just to say that this will be a process that it's a lot of moving parts. There are we want to make sure, for example, just to take one thing, when we're asking for different forms of readiness, we're really looking for the best piece of evidence you feel like you have that speaks to that particular readiness criteria. So let's say like you feel like your MOU speaks really strongly to a particular criteria, then we would just want you to attach that one document. We're not looking for multiple documents speaking to one criteria, but you can have a document speak to multiple criteria. So if that MOU is kind of your best evidence for, let's say, 3 different domains, then by all means attach it to all 3. But for each given criteria, we really just want the best example that you feel like you have for that criteria, not 3, 4 attachments all kind of speaking to the same thing. We just kind of want a best representation in those spaces. Roster of network partners. So this is just really giving us your cast of characters, making sure that all the folks that we want to see at the table in terms of the stakeholder groups are there. That also, again, has a template to make sure that you can just kind of run right through that. You don't have to reinvent that wheel. Authorized subgrant recipient and the phase 1 budget. So one of the things that we learned very clearly as part of our planning phase was that passing money through a state looks different in every state, right? And so this is really about making sure that you have a structure and a vision of how this money would move through the state, because that's going to look so incredibly different in each state. This wasn't something that we could kind of create a one-size-fits-all solution for. We want to make sure that however this needs to look for your state is going to be doable, and is going to be something that is really tailored to what is realistic, what is feasible in your specific state context. And then the budget alongside that to show us, how would it break down? Where would the different, who would be getting the different pieces of that funding? And so again, template for that. And then letters of commitment. Jenna talked about this, but we'll have multiple stakeholder groups that we really want to know upfront are involved, that they really are bought into this initiative. This is the type of initiative that is just not going to work if we don't really have genuine buy-in across the board from all the stakeholders that we need. And so wanting to make sure that we really have that up front, and frankly, as a good opportunity for you as a state applicant to be getting those conversations going, right? To make sure that people are on board, that this is happening, and that you don't have really key stakeholders all of a sudden at the 11th hour, acting like this is the first time they've heard about this. So this is a really important thing to make sure that we've got everybody on the same page. And so we have kind of a bucket for stakeholder groups, generally all the different stakeholder groups that you've outlined in your network of roster partners. But then we have a separate submission bucket for specifically the governor's office, kind of the policy side of things, and for the state data officer, who, whichever state data officer is most in charge of this particular work, as Jenna had mentioned before. So that's kind of a quick breakdown of proposals. And then I'll say a little bit about kind of the different phases of the review process. So stage 1 is really about baseline, right? It's really about making sure that states have met a baseline level of eligibility criteria, that conditions are really ripe in the state. A fair chance to advance is really aimed at states that are at a particular point in their trajectory. It's not a long enough timeline, right? And it's not enough funding to take states that do not already have kind of work happening in their state, all the way to the level that we want to see, for an exemplary national model. This is really for states that are kind of at a tipping point, that we feel like are close to a spot that if we can come in and offer some funding and some technical assistance, that really gets them over a particular hump in their state trajectory. And so the stage 1 is really about making sure that the states that are moving forward in the process are at that point, or have reached that milestone, so that we can say, great, these folks are conditions are ripe, right, for the type of work that we're doing. So this is about, as I said, the eligibility criteria as opposed to the priority criteria, which we're not assessing at this stage, and focusing really heavily on stakeholder readiness in two groups in particular, and that's the corrections partners and the post-secondary partners. So after we've kind of made that baseline assessment, then it moves to stage 2, which is the competitive regional review. This is where, Jenna mentioned, we're really thinking about this in terms of trying to ideally have one state from each of the U.S. Census regions, and so this is where states will kind of begin to be grouped in that way, so that you're not you're being assessed against the rest of your region, and this is where we're looking at eligibility criteria for states again, but also we're looking at, this is where the priority criteria will come in. And I want to spend a minute on this because it's important to note that the priority criteria, each of them is optional respectively. And that's because we really, frankly, anticipate that not every state is going to be able to speak to every priority criteria. These are really areas in which if you feel like a state is excelling particularly in this area, then we want to, of course, have an ability for you to evidence that. But there is not necessarily an expectation that states will be able to speak to every single priority criterion. And again, frankly, getting back to what I was saying about kind of a frank self-assessment of the state, if you don't feel like your state can speak to that criteria, we would encourage you not to. That's okay, right? We don't want you to just kind of like throw something at the wall and see what sticks. It's okay to say, you know what, we have nothing here. This is an area of growth for us. And so, we're not going to take you up on the opportunity to evidence this particular priority criteria. But if you have something in that domain, please, by all means, we'd love to see that. And so this is where that kind of second level of priority criteria, as opposed to just baseline eligibility criteria, come into play. And this brings in, again, we're looking very closely at an additional layer of criteria around corrections partners and around workforce and employer partners in particular. So that's stage 1 and 2. And then for stage 3, this is where we'll do the finalist interviews. As I mentioned before, this will happen in the second half of November. And so these will be virtual interviews with members of our team and the review team. And then we'll do final calibration, and we'll be selecting the cohort immediately thereafter, December, January, ahead of, as we mentioned before, the February 2026 start. So that's kind of a quick breakdown of all of that. Well, you'll see when you go into the application itself, this is all broken out very clearly there. It tells you how to name your files. It tells you, it breaks down, what is a eligibility criteria versus what is the bucket of priority criteria. It breaks it down by stakeholder group. Hopefully all that will be really clear. But of course, if anything pops up, fair chance to advance at jff.org, always open to you. But just kind of a top overview, but by all means, I would say please do dig into that application, because we really tried to make that comprehensive in a way that, hopefully at every single step, it's clear what we're looking for there. But I will turn it back to Jenna to talk a little bit more about selection and launch.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael. All right. So following the timeline that Michael has already laid out, I just want to highlight 2 additional final pieces, which is that we are also aiming for a relatively quick turn on executing grant agreements over the holiday season. So I want to flag that for folks. We aim to select states by early December, and then to be able to move those states through the contracts process in December and January. So we have included our terms and conditions for pass-through agreements as an appendix to the RFP. We're hoping that this will be helpful for that authorized representative, the entity that's best positioned to serve in that regard, to be able to identify any terms that may need to be addressed. And so folks can kind of move on that as quickly as they need to, so that this timeline feels feasible. Again, our sort of goal grant start date is February 1 of 2026, with a 4-year period of performance that runs through February of 2030. The other key piece right after grantee selection that I want to get on the radar for folks is that we are aiming to host this launch event in mid-March of 2026. We're currently shopping for venues and specific dates. We will be sharing the updated details on that in the FAQs as soon as we have it available, but want to put on your radar at this point that we ask that grantees officially launch their participation in their state action network by participating in this convening. And this means that folks that are on that sort of initial steering committee from the proposal stage are expected to attend this event. So please plan for that. This event will be a really critical opportunity to build those relationships, align on goals and expectations, and start that collaborative ecosystem mapping and needs assessment process. So really important time that we'll have together in mid-March. And again, the convening will take place in a city with access to a major airport. We're shopping around for some different options. We will let you know when we know where exactly that will be. I also just want to make a note, particularly for our corrections partners who I know face special challenges when it comes to getting approval for travel, that immediately following grantee selection, we will reach out and start the process of coordinating with our selected grantees so that they can complete all required processes for travel approval, event registration, and booking on time. So know that we are very much bearing that timeline and those challenges in mind, and that we will start working with the states immediately following selection so that we can execute that as quickly as possible. All right, and then in closing, I just want to share a few final reminders on opportunities to ask questions. As Michael's already named, if you have questions, you can absolutely contact our team directly at fairchancetoadvance@jff.org. Our aim will be to respond to all inquiries within 2 business days. Michael's already laid out the open question period and our plans for updating the FAQs as we go along. The fact that we'll be hosting office hour sessions with Coleridge, one in August, one in September, and one in October. So please put those on your calendar if you think that your state is serious about applying and you want to start gathering the troops who might have questions and getting that on their calendars as well. And ultimately, in closing, I want to offer just tremendous thanks to Ascendium, to our partners at the Coleridge Initiative, and to my amazing project team. This has already been a lion's share of effort and really a group effort. And we've benefited so much from the many stakeholders who helped us during the design phase of this initiative. So huge thanks to them as well. We're excited that it's live and out in the world. Please do reach out to us with questions as you review the RFP. And thank you so much.